All right, we're here as the Lost Rider podcast. All right, welcome back to the second half of this week's News from the Camp House. Sitting here with Paul Fuzinski, documentarian. Paul recently worked on a documentary with Chester Moore, executive editor of Texas Fish and Game magazine. Okay, so we said earlier that it's about great whites on the Texas Gulf coastline, but we've been talking about Cape Cod. So that's Massachusetts, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep, just outside of Boston.
Okay, so where does Chester, how does he contort this into being great whites on the Texas Gulf Coast?
Well, that's where a lot of the research is being done, is up there at the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of like the leading experts on the Atlantic shark stuff, and we went up there because Dr. Megan Winton is kind of one of the leading researchers who kind of figured out that these sharks were going into the Gulf. They were finding this stuff out, and they put a shark tracker on this shark named Leebeth, and they tracked her up and down the Gulf of Texas, and all the way down to Mexico. She went, and then she swam all the way back up to Mexico and went all the way back up the East Coast into Nova Scotia. So, I mean, this shark did some serious traveling, and Megan is based out of the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. So we went up there to interview her and learn more about what they do up there and how they're tracking the sharks. And it's pretty revolutionary stuff. I mean, there was reports back in the day, early 1900s, of people spotting great whites in the Gulf, but then people just write it off as stories and stuff like that. But they actually have bona fide research that there's tons of sharks in the Gulf. So that's how we ended up there, and we might be going back here in a few months. We'll see how that winds up.
All right, what was their explanation? What's this great amount of travel? Are they coming off the East Coast, come into the Gulf, cruise up and down the Texas coast, go down to Mexico, and turn around and go all the way up to Nova Scotia? What, why? Why would they travel like that?
That I don't have a good answer for. I mean, I think, from, if I remember correctly, that had something to do with just food,
Uh-huh.
and just like any other animal, they have travel corridors, and they're running up and down. It might have something to do with the weather. When it warms or cools up north, they go down south to stay warmer, and then I don't have a good scientific explanation for you on that one.
All right, what did they find as far as, great whites? This is being talked about like it's a new idea that great whites are in the Texas waters. Mm-hmm. But apparently, they've been here before.
Yeah, there are some of the reports that we had in the documentary going back to like early 1900s, 1930s, 1940s, 50s, through the 80s and 90s. And, people have seen them off the Gulf Coast while they're fishing. Some guys said they had them swim right by their legs while they were out wade fishing. Some guys seen them offshore. And, fishermen, just like hunters, they know what they're seeing out there. They spend their whole life out there fishing, and they see hundreds of species of fish every day. And, when something's off. And, it'd be like if you were hunting up here and where we're at in Jackson Hole, and you see all these elk and stuff, and then you saw some weird animal that wasn't supposed to be here, and people would just be like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't seem right. So there's all these, what they call anecdotal reports, that kind of verified what Chester had been thinking this whole time, because he had a buddy call him once off the Gulf Coast on a satellite phone, which we did interview him. His name was Captain Ryan Warhola. He called Chester while he was out running a charter boat, and he's like, I'm pretty sure I just saw a great white shark. This was in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm. And
so Chester started digging into the research on this. That's how he found all these old reports. And then, people just, at the end of the movie, Ryan was saying, people thought I was crazy. And now he's like, I have verified scientific evidence that I'm not crazy, because he's like, at first he thought it was a mako shark. He's like, I don't know, this thing's pretty big, dude. Like, I don't think it's a mako shark. It's not a common species that I'm seeing all the time. And that's really what started this whole story. And that's kind of how it snowballed, is Ryan saw the shark, called Chester. Chester kind of verified that he thought it was a great white. That's when he started digging in, finding these old stories. And that's when Megan had posted something online where she saw that this great white shark was in the Gulf, verified. That's when he was like, we got to tell this story, because nobody's telling it. And when, as far as I know, we're the first people to ever tell this story. I mean, I'm sure somebody will again at some point, but that's the whole premise of the documentary. And, it took a ton of work, but I think it's a good product. I think we did the best we could with what we had.
All right, how hard was it to do it? I mean, as far as your camera work and your audio and getting all the footage and putting it all together, how hard was that?
I mean, it was fairly difficult because it was just me and Chester. I mean, we didn't have a team. A lot of people film documentaries. They go out there, they have a team of people, guys doing lighting, guys doing... I mean, it was just him and I. I rolled up with a suitcase full of camera equipment, a couple of lights, and, it was nerve-wracking. You're interviewing one of the most... these people are on Shark Week, and they're on big-time TV shows every day, and it's just me and Chester out there interviewing them in their offices, and it was a ton of work. You definitely have to be attentive, you know what I mean? You have to make sure everything's running. You don't have two guys watching your equipment. It's just you. And but I've done it so many times where it's just me and him, or me by myself making these documentaries, that I'm kind of used to that. But yeah, we're always looking for funding for these documentaries. That's the hardest part of making this stuff. But you also got to go out and do it to get funding. So it's kind of a vicious cycle.
What about, the salt water, just on your equipment?
Mm-hmm. I didn't really have too many problems with that. I mean, you always try and keep your cameras out of the water. You get a lot of spray and stuff on your lenses. That salt water is pretty bad on stuff. Tripods, you can't have, metal stuff out there. It's going to rust. It just eats it up. Even we were only there for 4 days. But yeah, you got to be really careful. You got to have sealed underwater housings if you're shoving cameras in the water. But yeah, overall it wasn't too bad. I didn't come out with any massive any massive problems with any of my equipment, but the saltwater is tough.
When you put the thing together, were there a certain amount of graphics, maps, diagrams, coastal maps showing where these sharks are showing up, that type of thing that you had to go get?
Yeah, they had some of those maps. The Atlantic White Shark Conservancy had some of those maps, and there's another group that's doing similar research called O-Search. And they had maps tracking where the sharks were going, and then I just had to make some maps to show some of the animations of where that shark was swimming, and making up some animations, just figuring it out. Like I said, there's no budget, so we just make it work. But yeah, there is information out there. If you watch the documentary, there is information out there where people can actually look this stuff up in real time and see where those sharks are at, which I think is amazing, that they're able to do that.
All right, where would they look?
So if you want to watch it, you can go to Chester's YouTube channel, Chester Moore Wildlife Journalist. You can go to his website, highercallingwildlife.net. You can go to my website, aptitudeoutdoors.com. It's available on all of those places, and I like to think we did a pretty good job for what we had to work with.
All right, no, that's all good. I'm trying to think. All right, I don't know what great whites' main diet is, but wouldn't they be following like shrimp boats and stuff?
I don't know. I mean, their main diet off the Cape is supposed to be seals, but I believe they do eat other things. I think, if I remember correctly, they'll eat fish. They'll eat, if a whale dies, a carcass starts floating up, they'll eat that. They don't have any qualms about eating rotten stuff. I think they'll eat sea turtles. Yeah, I don't know if they're following shrimp boats around and stuff like that. I think the ocean's got a lot of food in it, so I don't think they're lacking, and they're huge animals. So,
well, I was just trying to think what's most plentiful, what you see on the Texas coast, and it just, I would assume that your I think, your shrimpers and those guys, if they're actually coming up or into the shallows, which is what we're talking about, that's the point, is that we're letting people know that these things are coming up in the shallows. They're not just offshore.
Yeah, well, they're in the shallows, but we were talking to Dr. Greg Scomal, and they actually have trackers on them, and some of them have dove down deep into the ocean, like way deep out into the ocean.
Uh-huh.
And one of the weird things about great white sharks, we have all this technology nowadays. We think we know everything. They still don't know where they breed. They still don't know where these sharks are breeding. Huh. After all this research, after all this time, so they're thinking that that's what they do down in those depths. But they don't know. So that's what they're trying to figure out. So they're not always just right offshore, but they're big fish. They can be anywhere in the water column if they want to be. But that's where we see them the most. They could be right off the shore, especially in some of that Gulf and some of that murky water. You'd have no idea. And chances are they're not going to bother you. But, how many shark attacks of great whites have you heard of in the Gulf? I've never heard of any.
Right.
But they're there. They are there. I can guarantee you that.
Huh. All right. Okay. All right. Well, now we know they're there. Okay. Paul, thanks for being with us this morning.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And, I've had Herman and I have been out in the woods for a couple of days out here in Montana filming a documentary for him. So you're going to have to keep your eyes out for that. That'll be coming out here in the next couple of months.
All right. All right. Folks, I hope you enjoyed it this morning. Paul and I are out here doodling around, getting some video in Wyoming and Montana. So, y'all, this weekend's edition was also brought to us by the Shaws Bend Social Club, country club, folks who don't have a country club. Now, y'all go out and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go wading in the Gulf thinking about those great whites. And be safe, have fun. And y'all just remember, pretty much in a day, it's sure a good day to be out in the woods.